Well, why don't I get started? And
Yes.
before I put an outline together, and I'll put it up, but before I put an outline, have either of you ever done a transaction with a townhouse or a condo?
My
And
first one,
your first one, which
it was
how
a townhouse.
it was a townhouse. Okay.
Yeah.
How about you? Did you?
No,
Okay. Okay. Which complex did you do it at?
It was, oh my gosh, it was in West Orange. Eagle, what is the name? Oh my God, I forget.
Eagle
the
Ridge.
name.
Eagle
Yes.
Ridge on Prospect. Okay. Okay. All right. That's an interesting one. That's a I'll talk to you a little bit about that, but that's kind of a very interesting complex because you have an HOA and then you have a bunch of mini HOAs. It's a little bit different. The other thing about Eagle Ridge too is they had major capital improvement programs that caused a very large special assessment with respect to deck projects and siding projects. So that's a good one to kind of start with because that's probably one of the more difficult ones to do. So let me just bring up my notes here. And this is a small enough class that if anybody wants to interrupt or have any questions, just feel free. Let me just bring my notes up here. Okay, can everybody see them? Can you see the notes?
Yes.
Okay, okay. So I'm gonna, the name of the class was Townhouses, Condos, and Co-ops. And I'm gonna kind of go over the structure of co-ops, but I'm gonna be really spending more time on townhouses and condos. I don't believe that there are too many co-ops in this area. I've never come across one, but obviously they are very common in New York City. So let me kind of distinguish the difference between townhouses and condominiums. So let's talk about the difference between condominiums and townhouses. So townhouses typically are, multi-level, either 2 or 3 level units. Condominiums, you just have to really kind of think of they're like apartments. They're usually just 1 level. And they could be ranch style, or they, like a garden complex style, or they could be a high rise. But that's typically the difference between a townhouse and a condominium, but they are very, very similar. So when you buy a townhouse or a condominium, you own your unit and you also own a percentage of the common area. Typically townhouses and condominiums, they typically retain a management company that manages the day-to-day operations, and they're governed by an HOA board. So when I say HOA, I talk about homeowners association. So the board is typically, they're typically, residents, and they typically have elections once or twice every other year for 4 seats. And typically they approve budgets, they approve, annual HOA fees, they approve capital improvement projects. And many times, with respect to capital improvement projects, they will make a recommendation to all residents, and all residents have the opportunity to vote on it. So, but, when you hear HOA, it's homeowners association. And, as I said, typically there's a management company and there is a board. Now, co-ops, I'm just going to talk very briefly about them. You probably remembered in real estate school, you know, they have a little bit of a different structure when you buy into a co-op. And as I mentioned, these are very common in Manhattan and Brooklyn. You effectively buy an interest or a share in the unit of the complex, and then you lease the unit from a corporation. It's a very weird, no, so effectively, bottom line, you own it, but it's a very weird ownership structure. And often, you know, that, you know, lenders could have difficulty with these. It's probably good that we don't have a lot of them in New Jersey, but it is good to understand them because you're going to be coming across New Yorkers who have to sell theirs. And so it's kind of, you know, they have to sell theirs so they can come to New Jersey to buy. But you should understand. So I would say for townhouses and condos, it's pretty straightforward. You own your unit and you own a percentage of the common area of the complex.
And then there
go
is
ahead.
no title, right? For the co-ops, like.
Well, yeah, you are given title, but I believe it is kind of shown as, you know, when you get your deed, but it's shown as like you're like a stockholder, so to speak,
Yeah,
of
sure.
the corporation. But it's a very funky structure, and it does complicate lenders. Lenders typically, you know, because of the ownership structure that you own like a share and you effectively lease it. So, I mean, bottom line, you own it, but it's a little bit of a complex structure. So obviously for townhouses and condominiums, it's pretty straightforward. You own your unit,
Yeah.
and you own a percentage of the common area. What is the common area? You know, that could be all the grounds, it could be the pool, it could be the fitness center, it could be the clubhouse.
Question.
Sure.
Does it take longer because you have to get approved on the co-op from the co-op board than a condominium sale? Can the process take longer?
it is. And, you know, I was going to talk about that. You know, it's interesting. That's a really good question. The co-op board interview is, you know, one thing is, if you remembered from real estate school, co-ops, given their membership, they have a right to, they can be selective and they can interview and they can reject for any reason. So if, let's say, you know, where obviously in, you know, with all other sales like condominium or townhouses, you know, obviously, you know, you have many protective classes for age, for religion, for family status, for you know, for race. But a co-op board, they can deny for whatever reason. And that's why, you know, when you're working with a buyer who has to sell his co-op in New York City, that, you know, when they get buyers, you know, obviously, you know, let's say, you know, you're working with them and they put an offer in on a unit in Bloomfield, on a home in Bloomfield, but they have to sell their co-op in Manhattan. So, so let's say that the sale contingency was accepted. And so, you know, you want, as you're working there, you know, you want to be very familiar, like, well, where do they stand and where does their buyer stand on getting approved by the board? And normally that's a kind of a very critical point of getting the co-op board approval. And once that's in place, then it you know, you kind of know that, you know, this looks really good for their buyer to be approved.
Do you get informed, or does the buyer's attorney gets informed?
I think the buyer would find out right away. You know,
oh, the buyer. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
the buyer who's getting interviewed would know. But it can be for many different reasons. So, and it may not be a fair process too. So, but it's good to understand it. You're not going to really run into as I said, I'm not aware of any co-ops in this area in Morris, Essex, and Union. There could be some, but I've never dealt with them. But I have done a number of townhouse complex and condo complexes in the area since I've been in the business. So we'll spend, but before I move forward, does anybody have any questions?
Is the process the same like doing a single family purchase?
It is, but I'm going to get into it. It is very similar. You write a contract, but I'm going to kind of go through some of the nuances of things that you need to know when you're working with your sellers and your buyers. But to answer your question, yes, when you write an offer, it's it's the same process. You write an offer, you get the pre-approval. It's the same process with respect to, mortgage commitment, percentage of money down, closing date. But there's a lot of things that you need to ask for. You have to do a lot of homework on the complex, bottom line. So when you're working with either a seller or a buyer, these are things that you want to get a hold of. The first thing is a prospectus of a complex. If it's relatively new, they may have it, and this would have all information with respect to floor plans, models, etc. It will have all the information, and typically this isn't something that the lender will need to see, but this is something that would probably be very helpful for the buyer to have all that information. This is with respect to all the plans that went underway as they were building the complex.
I'm sorry, who would have that information?
Well, the owners. It's usually passed down from owner to owner as they sell.
Oh, owners. Okay.
Yeah. So it's the prospectus of the complex. And if it's a very old complex, most likely you're not going to get it. But typically it's passed down from owner to owner, and and this is something that you should ask for. The next thing is the bylaws. These are all the rules and regulations and restrictions with respect to a complex. This is regarding rules with respect to moving in and moving out, with respect to pets, with respect to renting out your units, with respect to doing renovations, with respect to noise, etc. So you need to get that in place. So at least your buyer will know. So as I said, I'm talking about, getting this information for, if you have a seller, you want to get this information because a good agent representing the buyer is going to ask for it. So when you take a listing, say, please get me this information, because this is the information that, as I said, any good agent is going to request, or it could be requested in an attorney review. Or it could be, I typically, when I'm working with buyers, I write it on the offer, please, I basically say seller to provide these documents before conclusion of attorney review. Financials, very, very important. You want to get their audit going past the 3 years. You want to be able to look to get a sense of the strength of their balance sheet. You want to make sure that they have good capital reserves in place if they have to face big projects like decks or siding or roofs. Every year they'll do a budget, and this will, so if you're looking at, let's say that, you're working with a buyer now and he's looking at complexes, I would say probably by November, they'll have their budget for 2023 that can give you a sense of what they're projecting their HOA fees. So do you guys understand like what HOA fees are?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, bottom line, so as a condo or townhouse holder, you're going to be paying your mortgage and you're going to be paying your property taxes, but you're also going to be paying the HOA fees. And these are basically fees that covers their operating expenses relating to landscaping, snow removal, security, maintaining a pool, clubhouse, fitness center, valet services. So you want to get a sense of, the budget, are they, so obviously if there's a shortfall, then the question is what type of special assessment could they be facing? So you want to kind of get a sense of that. Your buyer should know, that, because that could happen, depending upon, a lot of times, like with snow removal, in prior years, there used to be like a special assessment, depending upon if they reserved for snow removal, and let's say they had a really bad year, a lot of bad storms. Well, they may have, there could be like a budget shortfall. It's really kind of funny. In recent years, we've actually had some moderate, we've had some moderate winters. So I imagine on the snow removal, it's probably going to be, that they'll probably have surpluses as a result. But you want to, as I said, looking at the financials and looking at the budget, you want to kind of get a sense of, do they project a shortfall? Then that you could be getting maybe a little bit of a larger increase in the HOA fees, and more importantly, you could be exposed to the buyer could be exposed to a special assessment. Special assessments can be paid over time. Getting back to the Eagle Ridge complex, which is on Prospect Avenue in West Orange, they had major renovation plans where the homeowners were caught, they were exposed to special assessments of like $15,000 for decks and siding that they basically were able to pay over time. But this is, you just really have to do your homework. You have to look at what you have to ask the questions. What capital improvements are they going to be doing? Let's say, well, we're going to be doing a new roof. Well, are you reserved for it, or are you going to have to borrow, or are you going to have to hit the homeowners with a special assessment?
I have a question. This is
Sure.
Immaculata. In terms of the financial, do you ask for this? Who asks for it? Is it the person representing the buyer or the person representing the seller? Who actually needs this documents?
So, that's a good question. So what I was saying is, typically, let's say, I would say either if you're the listing agent or the buyer's agent, you're asking for this information. A good listing agent, if they're in the process of taking a listing at a complex, a good listing agent would get all these documents in place. So if you have an interested buyer, you can forward that to their agent. So I would say either if you're representing the seller, you should get the information and have it ready for prospective buyers. If you're representing the buyer, make sure that you get that information. You go to the listing agent, you go to the management company. And what I usually do is I usually write in the offer that I want to get these documents before we conclude a term review. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is, it's a lot of homework here. It's you want to make sure that these complexes are well managed, they're well capitalized. You want to make sure, you want to do as much work on it for your buyer that they're not going to be hit with some special assessment that is going to, throw them for a loop. So the other thing is, get a history of HOA fee increases. Has it been going up with inflation, or have there been, significant increases, and try to get an explanation. Well, why, like 2 years ago, did fees go up like 12% versus the normal 2.5%? So understand that. So, talk to the management company, ask the listing agent, but a good listing agent should know that complex really well and should have that information. So if you're representing the buyer, they can just quickly shoot it to you.
If you call the management company, like you suggested, are they obligated to disclose that information?
Yeah, I mean, a good management company will, like, I just recently closed one at the Claridge House in Verona. And this is kind of like a high amenities complex. And it was for an older couple. And I called the management company and they were very helpful with respect to, they gave me a sense of what their capital improvements were. I got their financials and then I went through their capital improvements and they gave me a lot of detail. It can vary. There are some management companies that are not great. And at that point, if you're going to get the information, it's probably better to try to have the homeowner, the seller, get the information. They'll probably be in the best position to get it. But as I said, you know, that a good listing agent will try to get the information and will work with the seller to make sure they have that information. But to answer your question, I mean, I've had some where I've called the management company and said, you know, listen, I'm either representing a prospective buyer or a buyer who's in a term review or a buyer that's under contract. A lot of times they'll be helpful. Are they obliged? No. Should they? Yes. Are there bad management companies? Yes.
Question.
Sure.
What if the HOA, the board refuses or is very reluctant to provide the needed information? Like I'm selling one right now at the Highland Lofts condominium on Scotland Road in Orange.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just not providing their audited financials.
They're not. Okay. Did ask the seller. The seller should have received either a physical mail-in or an email with that information. Did they?
No, they did not.
They did
The
not.
problem, yeah. The problem is that this particular complex was owner managed. They just recently hired a third party management company. So it's really a mess and it's affecting the sale. Mm-hmm.
Well, you know what, then, you know, you do the best you can. And I would say, listen, just be very open with the buyer's agent and say, listen, you know what, this is what's going on. We may not get the information, you know, then it really kind of depends upon, you know, the buyer doing as much of their own work as they can. But be honest with it. Yeah, just say, listen,
of course,
this is what's going on. I don't know if I can get the information. But you know what? I bet you that they would appreciate you being candid on it versus, you know, and just say, listen, this is the best we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and sometimes that happens too.
Yeah.
You know, and I've had ones where I've called and they say, oh no, we can't talk to you, you know, you're not the owner. And then, you know, at that point, then the listing, you know, if I'm representing the buyer, then I said the listing agent's going to actually have to get the seller to call them, you know, because the seller's an owner and they're entitled to have that information. But a good management company, a lot of times this information is emailed to them or mailed to them. And, you know, the owners should kind of keep these records because this is, as I said, a good agent is going to be requesting all this information.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, as I said, you also need to kind of understand what their capital improvement program is, like what type of renovations they're going to do. So these are renovations. I'm not talking about obviously within the unit. I'm talking about in the common areas, like in the hallways, or are there landscaping projects, or are there decks, or are they looking to put a new pool, or are they looking to add tennis courts, or, you know, you want to know what are they contemplating, and then looking at the financials. Do they have the reserves, or is this going to be a big hit as a special assessment? And as I said, I would say the one that takes the cake is probably the Eagle Ridge facility in West Orange on Prospect, because they've had major renovation projects that that homeowners had to like finance up to like $15,000 to pay over time. So you know, a good agent, if that's the risk, you know, and it really kind of depends upon your buyers. I think your buyers are always going to want to, they're going to appreciate, you know, some buyers may say, you know what, it is what it is. I as an example, I just worked with this older couple, and they were from Westchester County, and I had actually, their children, their son has been a client of mine for years. And I recently worked with the son, and they bought a house in Verona, and the parents, and I'd known the parents because as I said, on the number of transactions I did with the son, I used to see the parents. And for the parents, they both had physical issues. They wanted to be close to their son. And, you know, I got them as much information, you know, so for them, they said, it is what it is, you know, in terms of, I got, okay, these are the renovations they're going to be doing. It sounded like a lot, but for them, what was important was they had a place that, you know, had high amenities, valet services, so that they were both had physical issues, that it made sense. So, you know, bottom line, it made sense. So that may be, but you know, you want your buyer not to be surprised in the first few weeks of like saying like, holy cow, what do you mean we're going to hit the special assessment of like $10,000? You know, so you really got to do your homework, and you have to understand, ask the questions. And, you know, and then as I said, what I do is I say, I want this information. I write it. Please provide this information before conclusion of a term review. So at least the buyers can consider it. If you do that, it's going to be, you know, then the seller's attorney is going to be working with the seller and the listing agent, says, you better, let's get this information. Okay, one thing that you're going to see is these. Have you, if you can, and if you haven't, look at some of the listing sheets for condos and townhouses. One thing that you're going to see is an application fee, which is kind of like a front end fee. And basically these fees help subsidize the HOA so they can kind of manage. So it's like a front end, the way I look at it, it's like a front end tax that you have to pay. Have you guys seen that on, have you seen like an application fee on like a townhouse listing or a condo listing?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So what is it? Well, it's really, it's a tax. You know, it's a front end fee that they pay. And as I said, it helps subsidize the financials. It could range from like $1,000 maybe, or to $5,000. Or on this one, the Claridge house, it was like 6 months of HOA fees. Typically, this will appear on the closing disclosure as a closing cost, and obviously, the buyers will be advised that they'll have to come up with the funds to, this will be like a closing cost that they'll have to pay. Any questions so far?
Can you explain that application fee again, please?
Okay. So an application fee is typically, and this is very common with these townhouse and condominium complexes in New Jersey. You're going to see that typically it's a line item on as you fill out a form, as you fill out the listing sheet, or you'll see it if you're representing the buyers, that it will say, as example, there'll be a $1,400 application fee. So this is going to be a closing cost to your buyer. It's a tax. It's basically, it's a front end fee, and basically, it's like, in order to so they're going to say it's for various administrative costs. So basically, not really. It basically just helps, subsidize these HOAs, but it's very common. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So
Okay.
Dennis, like in this document that you have here, you talk about the FHA and VA buyers. I want to understand, because I have seen a lot of
So I was going to get into that, and I was going to talk a little bit about the FHA and VA buyers, it's very important. Before I go on to, let me just on this one point on the lender approval, the lenders, if you're working with your buyers, the lenders are going to want to see bylaws, financials, and budgets before approving the mortgage for your clients. So as I said, your clients should be able to see this because they should know, but their lender is likely going to ask for this information as well. So especially with the financials. So as best you can, try to get the information. Now let's talk about FHA VA buyers. This is a problem for them. And why is it a problem? Because, typically for FHA and VA buyers, VA buyers is really putting 0% down as a benefit, as being a veteran, and an FHA buyer is only putting 3.5% down. So the lenders view them to be more at risk if in the event that you had a calamity, a problem. What's a problem? Let's say there was a major event. Let's say even the pandemic, which I don't believe that happened, but let's say a major pandemic that was a lot worse than what we had experienced, where people were losing their jobs. So what happens? So let's say you're in a complex with 15 units, and let's say 5 of those units default on their HOA fees. What do you think happens? I'll throw that question out. What do you think happens?
It'll be rolled over to you, right?
It would basically, you're going to be picking it up. The other unit holders will be picking it up. So they're more at risk. So they typically, it's very, very difficult. When I first got into business, there were a number of complexes that were FHA approved. And over the years, I've seen that decline, and a lot of them aren't. Now, a lender could come in and do their own assessment. It's a very lengthy assessment, but one of the things that they're looking at is, if they did their own review, they're looking at things in terms of, percentage of distressed units, meaning short sales or REOs, bank owned or defaults, or they're looking at how many properties are owner occupied versus investment properties. So they look at a lot of things, but those are the two major factors. But I would say if you're working with FHA VA buyers, I would advise them, and I always do when I work with them, it's going to be very difficult to get them approved for a townhouse or a condominium complex. There is a HUD website that you can go to check. I know, like at one point, I don't even know if there was one complex in Union that I've had a number of transactions at the point of 22. They used to be FHA approved, but a lot of places have not been keeping up with it on that. So I would say that this may not be a good option if you're working with VA or FHA buyers.
I got a question.
Sure.
So what I know, VA, they don't have to put any money down, but so happens that you're able to convince your VA buyer to put some money down. Does that better their chances of getting a place, or getting approved?
The only thing. So let's talk about that. So what could be done? Things are really up in the air right now because obviously we're going through. Mortgage rates are going through the roof right now. So there's a lot of scrutiny now, and it may be difficult, if you're working with FHA buyers, that let's say a year ago, you were at 3% versus yesterday, I was talking to some lenders that I think rates went as high as 7.5%. So I think to answer your question, if they switch to like a conventional mortgage where maybe you could put as little as 5% down, that might be a possibility. I think, and as I said, I'm talking about before the spike in mortgage rates. Maybe now they may require 10%. But I've had in a number of cases where the VA and FHA buyer were able to switch to a conventional, maybe putting as little as 5% down. But we're kind of in a new world right now with rates being as high as they are. With higher rates, they may require 10% down. I think you can easily get a mortgage with 10% down. I've never had a problem. I've worked with a lot of buyers that put 5% down for a conventional, but I guess we'll have to see. If that's a great question for Justin. Are they in this type of environment? Are they allowing 5% mortgages? But that's a way to do it. So you'd have to switch out of the program. Now, it's interesting too. In the past, rates on FHA and VA tend to be more attractive than conventional rates in the past. So, but if they come across a unit they like, a lot of things can be done. If you're working with a couple, they could borrow from a family member, or maybe have a family member, go on buy the house with them. There's a lot of things that can be done. But
have you ever heard of like the owner financing a deal?
You mean it's not a great option, by the way, but yeah, it's actually, I've talked to an attorney about that. And, so basically that is when an owner takes paper back, so to speak. And that could be a possibility on a very difficult, but it's not an ideal situation for a seller. And I was talking to an attorney that I work with quite a bit, and he says that has run into so many problems over the years. And it's not as easy. And I think ideally a seller would like to get his money and go. Unless it really makes sense for the seller to do that, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that's a great option. But when I was a kid, I grew up in the 70s, that was a big option. I remember as a kid, my parents didn't have to do it, but you heard about that where owners effectively took paper back. So it was owner financed. That could be a possibility. But I don't think that's a great option for the sellers who probably just want to get their money and go. So bottom line, if you're working with FHA VA, warn them, say, listen, it is restrictive, and the number of FHA approved units are down significantly from like 10 years ago.
So Dennis, I seen a lot of townhouses and condominiums that on the listing agent puts there like no FHAs, no VAs, and is there.
Yeah, that's it. Well, that's basically they're telling you it's not FHA approved. I would say most of them are not these days.
But that's because of the homeowners association. That's what I get.
No, it's basically it's the lenders. It's
the
not
land.
the homeowners association. There's probably standards that they need to do every year to maintain that, but a lot of them have let that go. And as I said, over the years, I mean, this hasn't really been a problem because you were able to have buyers maybe go in with conventional with putting as little as 5% down. So there were ways to kind of get around it, but I would say when I first got in the business, like in 2009, there were a lot of FHA approved. I I have not come across one. And yeah, a lot of listings, and that's probably smart. You know, you may want to put on there, no FHA VA mortgages.
Yeah, I came across a few of them, and even like speaking with the seller agent, even before bringing, they were already like, hey, you know, is a conventional or, and they're being very specific about it.
Yeah, I would,
Are they more like strict with the FHA when they do the appraisal of the home? Are they more strict with the appraisal, or?
well, I mean, that's not really the issue here. I mean, the issue here is with respect to that lender's view that given the small amount down that FHA and VA buyers are putting down, they're more at risk in the event that there was like a calamity where they would be, you know, they don't want their borrowers to be distressed where they have to be picking up additional HOA fees for people defaulting on it. So their view is that, you know, with conventional, you know, you have more skin in the game. You have, you know, you're putting more down, and you're a better position to be able to offset that. And then to get to your point about, and I've worked with a lot of FHA buyers over the years, and to tell you the truth, it used to be old school with FHA that you know, it's really interesting. And I don't want to diverge too much from this, but to answer your question, you know, I've worked with a lot with FHA buyers, and I know the old school was, it used to be hard to get their offers accepted because they were concerned about a more restrictive appraisal. And they were concerned about that the buyers were putting a small amount money down. But I gotta be quite, yeah, so the issue is that when you have an FHA appraisal, the risk is that the appraiser could require certain safety features to be done at the house. So this could be like an additional repair issue that your seller would have to face in addition to an inspection. I gotta be quite honest, since I've been in the business, I've done a lot of FHA. I've worked a lot with FHA VA buyers, and I've never come across that situation where you know, where the appraisal, where there was additional requirements on the seller. I've actually had a few conventional mortgage appraisals where you know, the appraiser kind of saw, like, I remember I closed one in Roselle Park about a couple of years ago, and there was an issue with the kitchen being in the basement, and they cited that, and they had to get rid of the kitchen, and you know, it's kind of like a mother-daughter facility. And I also had one in Maplewood about 5 years ago where the appraiser immediately says, you know, you have to put a railing on. And I called my buyer's mortgage rep and I said, okay. And he says, don't worry, it only if, you know, if it's required by the town, will they make you do it? Well, at the end of the day, I knew that wasn't going to be the case. And I said to my buyers, we're going to probably have to get railings. And I put him in touch because, you know, the mortgage rep switched and says, okay, looks like you have to put railings up. But anyway, I think you have as much risk, in my opinion, with conventional. I've done a lot of VA mortgages over the year. I've done a lot of FHA buyers. I don't necessarily see one as being more risky, and it's hard too, because, you know, like, especially when you go in a multiple offer situation, you know, a lot of times, you know, you're kind of put at the bottom of the deck, so to speak, and it's hard, you're disadvantaged. And, you know, and believe me, I've done multiple offer situations as a listing agent where I took the FHA buyer because it was a better offer. So I'm comfortable with the process, but I think old school, they view it being more of a risky financing. I didn't mean to go off too much on FHA, but, you know, I just wanted to answer your question. But
Yeah.
you know, but as I said, you know, this is this issue with the the town, the financing of townhouses and condominiums, it's more lender specific. It's not really with respect to the inspections.
Okay, small lender because of the, okay.
Well,
All right.
it's because they're seeing that they're higher risk. So obviously for a
Higher.
single family home, they obviously they have more control over their costs. With a townhouse or condominium complex, they have less control. So effectively they have to pay fees, which could go up. So if either you faced either a major economic recession, or you faced a major capital improvement, or you faced, bad management of a complex, your buyer who bought there could be hit with major fee increases. And that's the risk that the lenders are thinking about.
Yeah, thank you for that. That clarifies.
Okay, no problem. That was a good question. HOA fees, they're budgeted yearly. And as I said, increases could vary depending upon the amenities offered at a complex and the financial strength of the complex and the capital improvements. So really do your homework, pull all this information. If you're doing a deal in a complex, try to get as much information from the listing agent as you can. It behooves the listing agent to also do their homework so they can sell their listing. But if you have problems, you should reach out to your office and ask people, has anyone bought at this complex? What's your experience? Is it good management? You want to kind of get a sense of you want to make sure what your buyers are getting themselves into. Like, do they do a good job on landscaping? After a major snowstorm, how quickly do they get in there? Do they do a good job plowing? You want to find that out. Ask agents in the office, like, oh, by the way, let's say the Highlands in West Orange, like, and if you're doing like a trip deal there, and which is a very well managed complex, I would imagine if you reach out to agents in our office, I'm sure a ton of agents have done transactions. At least you can get their take on it. But as I said, it's I would say that there is more homework involved for a buyer's agent on a townhouse or a condominium complex than there is on a single family home. Amenities, amenities could be just common fees. It could be there's no really yard, it just sits on a block. So it could be just a matter of cleaning the hallways, you're making sure it's clean and clear. Or they could be significant. They could have very high amenities. They could have a pool, they could have a fitness center, they could have security guard, they could have a clubhouse, they could have tennis courts, they could have valet service, parking service, it really depends. So, so HOA fees, I want to say on average, at least in this area, I want to say they're probably mid 400 range to 500 range. But you do have these complexes like the Top in Maplewood or the Newstead in South Orange, which is they're literally right across the street from each other on South Orange Avenue. Or there's this very high-end place in West Orange, right across the JCC called the Vizcaya. Have any of you ever seen that complex?
Yes.
It's very, very high-end. And you're looking at HOA fees probably close to like $2,500 to $3,000 a month, because they take care of everything. The place at the Claridge house that I just sold, very high amenities. But it's kind of interesting. One of the things that was at the Claridge house where I just recently did a transaction at, They are about $2,000, but that also includes utilities. So, I mean, you know, your heat, your hot water, your electric, you know, that makes a difference. So, but I would say, you know, see what the level of the HOA fee is, and just make sure they know like what they're getting for their money. You know, as I said, you know, you want to, when you sit down with your buyer, you want to kind of get a sense of what are they looking for, you know, and that's really important. And so you want to basically know the facilities in the area of what amenities are offered, because when you sit down with them, you ask them, you know, they may want to say, listen, we're downsizing, and we're selling a home, and you know, we really don't want to have to take care of our backyard, that's why we're moving. Or this could be the first purchase for a young couple. So typically it's either somebody downsizing, selling their home to move into this, or it could be a young couple buying. But you want to know, what are they looking for? What do they want? You know, is a pool important for them? It might be, or it may not be. So just make sure that you know the amenities, and that there are going to be no changes to the amenities. You don't want to be a situation of all of a sudden they want a pool and there's a pool, but there's a point to close the pool down. So just kind of know what the amenities are, and make sure that they're going to be continue to be maintained at the complex. I want to talk about insurance, because this is one thing that the lender is going to require. So obviously, you know, like any other transaction or purchase, a buyer is going to have to get homeowners policy. So their homeowners policy is only going to cover like from within the walls. So that would be really windows and doors would belong to them, and then everything outside that belongs, you know, is a shared interest. So there's really two policies. You're going to get your homeowners, the buyer will get his homeowner's policy for his unit, and then there's also like a master complex policy. So let's say there was like a major fire in the complex, you know, so you basically both policies would work together, the individual as well as the master. But typically you're going to find, as you work with your buyer, their lender is going to not only want to see their individual policy, they're going to want to see the master complex policy as well. Does that make sense?
So wait, so
Yeah,
I'm a little confused. So the lender might ask for either or, right? But you're saying
I'm saying both. He'll ask for
both.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm saying both. Most likely, definitely he'll want to see the homeowner's policy. But if it's in a complex, and given that, you know, the master complex policy will cover all other areas, they're going to likely want to see that policy as well. I often see it when I'm working with buyers, the lenders will request both. So that's one thing too. If you are working with a seller, make sure that you also try to get a copy of that policy, because a lot of times that's going to be requested from the buyer's lender.
So this master complex policy is basically related to the amenities of the
So it's basically all common areas, you know, it's basically, you know, insurance on all their facilities as well as the property, all shared interests, all you know, for basically all the common areas.
And how much that costs a year? Like homeowners could be between what, around 1,500 or less?
I mean, homeowners 1,500, and a master policy probably, I don't know, I don't have that number, but I would imagine that could be about, I'm just throwing a number out there, it could be like 40, 50,000. I don't know, for a fact that I could imagine it could be pretty high.
So the master complex policy if you're saying it's 40, 50,000, is that for the life of, how would, like, you would pay that?
Well, I mean, that the whole complex pays it. So I'm just saying, yeah, the whole complex, and that's, so basically, the board will approve that, but obviously that budget item, and then you're collecting all the HOA fees that will be going towards that. So maybe 40, 50 might be too high, but it's probably, it's at least 10 to 20, I would imagine.
But it's
And
split,
that's gonna be paid,
I'm sorry, but it's split through the units, right? Or the,
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so obviously your HOA, that's gonna be a line item, that's gonna be paid from HOA fees.
Oh, so that would be included in the HOA fees?
That would be included, yeah, that would be included, like so you're gonna be paying, part of your HOA fee will go towards the master complex policy.
Oh, okay, because I said to myself, Jesus, like now they besides the mortgage, besides of the insurance, now they have to have a second thing going on and the HOA fee, and then that now, okay, I see.
Yeah, I know, it's, so my initial number might have been a little bit on the high side, but I want to say, it's probably at least 10, 20, 25, so it's basically, depending upon the size of the complex.
on the co-op, do they have the same guidelines as a master complex policy as well?
Yeah, they're probably, as I said, probably more complicated, but they do. And each homeowner would probably be responsible for getting insurance for the unit. And, then their member board, so to speak, would get a policy for basically all common areas.
Got it.
And that's something that the lender would likely have to see. So one of the things I wanted to spend a little time on is like renovations, and this is something too. So if you, let's say you kind of, as you go into a unit, and let's say a buyer is really saying, gee, I want to open up this kitchen, I want to do this, I want to move these walls, I want to basically bump out the kitchen, through the dining room. Make sure, check with the management company, see what they require. Most complexes do allow renovations, but they're not going to allow anything probably too crazy. So most likely you're going to have to, your buyer, when they're ready to do renovations, is going to have to bring their building plans on the renovations, and as well as showing copies of permits. They're going to want to see they want to make sure that it's that everything you're doing is lawful, so to speak. But you want to make sure that there are no restrictions on renovations. So the only restrictions I could say is normally, like if you're going to do new windows or doors, most likely they're going to ask you to make sure that those windows and doors are compatible with the other windows and doors of the other units. That'd be one. That's usually a common requirement. But if, but they, I would say, as most complexes, they, you've gone into these units where they've done, they've opened up the kitchen, and that was allowed. But you want to just double check that with as you're working with your buyer, because you want to make sure that you even if they're not looking to make renovations, you just want to make sure that there are no weird restrictions. So we talked about the renovations, and as I said, the other major issues I would say is obviously pets and renting out your unit. And interesting enough, sometimes some complexes may have restrictions from renting it out, and that would be covered in the bylaws. So that's why it's really important to get that piece of information. On the pets, it could be breed restrictions or weight restrictions. But you don't want to be in a situation if they move in, all of a sudden they bring their pet and they find out that they can't keep the pet at the complex. So I know I went through a lot of material, so let's just open up if anybody has any questions.
I'm good. Thank you for the class. Really nice.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Always learning.
Is the time frame, so my just a question, is the time frame of it, because I mean, can you close within 60 days? 60
Yes,
days?
you can. You can. You can. You can. As long as, I mean, as long as you don't, you know, that's what I say, just be kind of cognizant of the pitfalls, you know, like some of the things that years ago, it used to be that, you know, you were finding, you know, like, especially with the FHA VA buyers, and, you know, sometimes you had them in there and then, you know, then people thought that they were approved and they weren't. And sometimes that kind of comes up, and that could possibly delay, especially if the buyer has to switch mortgage programs. Yeah, you can definitely close. So everything else, the process is the same. You know, there's nothing different, you know, in terms of deposits, in terms of inspections, in terms of title work, appraisals. It's all very, very similar. Maybe one thing I will throw out, I often find that the inspection process is easier in complexes than it is in single family homes.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, it's an easier process. The appraisal, you know, you should take a look at it, if, you know, especially if what you're looking to offer. Look at recent sales in that complex, because that's what an appraiser is going to be looking at. So, you know, if you see like a 3-bedroom, look at the pictures, just be really familiar. And, you know, like, because, you know, at the end of the day, if, you know, I mean, we're in a different market now. I would say like a year ago, you know, our buyers were having to give up their, you know, their appraisal rights. That's not really happening now. So, you know, so if there is an appraisal issue, most likely it's going to be more of a burden to the seller versus the buyer. Not to say that the buyer may, I mean, if the buyer really wants it and it falls on the seller may say, well, you're going to have to share this with me, you know, and, you know, they may say, okay, that's fine. We'll take it down a certain amount, but you're going to have to basically put a higher down payment based on the lower assessed valuation of the property, if that makes sense.
Can the agent be held liable? You know, you do your due diligence looking into, like you said, all these assessments, the financials and so forth, especially on the HOA improvements, and your buyers move in and all of a sudden they get whacked.
Well, you know what? Could a buyer sue you? Yes, a buyer could sue you for anything. I've never had a lawsuit against me. And obviously, that's why you have your E&O insurance, you know. And I would say, like being a real estate agent, you know, it's funny. I remember when I got my broker's license a few years ago, I remember the instructors said that, like, with dual agency deals, that's where you had a lot of lawsuits. So I've never had a lawsuit, but typically, you know, if they knew it was dual agency, either if you had both sides or you had a colleague in your office had one side and you had one side, typically, you know, if there were any type of problems, or if the buyer was dissatisfied, if the attorney knew it was dual agent, you know, they would be trying to push that to try to sue the broker and the agent. I would say, you know, what I do is just be very, very clear with all information that you're trying to get for the buyer, and say, you know, as I said, put it in the offer, and make sure that, you know, that they know that you're trying. And then, you know, on the circumstance, we got that one question. They mentioned one of the participants on today's call mentioned that they're having problems with a facility on Scotland Road in Orange. You know, you may get a roadblock, but, you know, have it in writing, text and say, listen, I tried, but they're saying I can't get this information. So at least you're on record. You've done everything, you know, you asked all the right questions, and you may get roadblocks, but just be very candid with the buyer and their attorney. Say, I tried. And
Yeah, that's that's what I was gonna say. Like, doesn't it like the attorney also is in with you in this process, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're gonna do it now. Well, how hard would an attorney's working on any transaction? He's gonna really rely on the agents to try to work to get this information. I don't think an attorney is gonna be.
Yes, but I'm saying is the information, we get the information shared with the attorney, right?
Yes.
And everything else.
Mhm.
Where the attorney now working with the client is
Yeah.
sharing that information with the client.
Absolutely. So when as you let's say you put an offer in, and let's say that you made it subject to all these things that you wanted, like the financials, you wanted the budget, you wanted the bylaws, etc. So then I would, at that point, the listing agent may say, well, I tried, I couldn't get anything, which is pretty bad. At that point, then the seller's attorney may go to the seller and say, listen, you got to do whatever you can to try to get this information, because this is a contingency on the deal. And, at the end of the day, as a buyer's agent, you may also have to get resourceful too. Put the phone calls in, try to get that information. But then you may just come back and say, listen, I tried. I called up the management company. I called the listing agent. We talked to the seller, and we cannot get this information. So at least it's on record. Then it's up to the buyer to see whether or not he still wants to move forward if they're getting a roadblock on this information.
Yeah.
As you said, just put it in the contract prior to, right? Like
I do. I always put in the contract. I said, listen, a good listing agent, as I said, would have this information all ready to go. When I take listings, by the way, the things that I would pull, I would, if I was my listing, I would make sure I have all these documents ready to go. And then the other thing that I do on all my listings is I do Oprahs. You know what Oprahs are?
yes.
Yeah, so you pull permits. So it's a really easy process. You can email the town, and they have a form, and you can request all the permits that were ever applied on the property. Typically, their records go back like 10 to 12 years. But I do that on my listings. I always do it for the buyers, but I do it on my listings too, because I don't want to be surprised that all of a sudden that I don't know that they did a water heater without a permit. And by the way, a water heater has a lot of teeth to it, by the way. I mean, when I say teeth, I mean in terms of getting approved, because they're not looking at maybe the plumbing, they're making sure it vents out, and then ultimately they could be looking at the flue of a chimney. So there's a lot of teeth to it. So I don't want to be blindsided. So I'm going to pull it. So if I'm working with a buyer or if I'm working with a seller, I'm going to be pulling that information. So at least, and then believe me, it makes it a lot easier. Let's say I pulled the permits and it shows that everything got permits. So as soon as we get a prospective buyer, I said, oh, by the way, here's the Oprah report. Done. That if they have that information, that's great for the buyer. That's one less thing they have to worry about. Does anybody have any other questions?
No, I'm good. And I want to thank you so much for the class. And
Thank
I
you.
have,
Hey,
I
and
have
a lot.
to make phone calls. Thank you, guys. See you soon.
See you soon.
Thank you
All right.
so much.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
And
Thank
if I have any question, I'll reach out to you.
Absolutely. Anytime
Thank you.
anybody has questions, just reach out to me.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
All right, guys. Have a wonderful week, the rest of the week.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.